There's some
Teeth?
of that in there. Yeah, teeth.
Do not put any kind of imagery for that one. All right, I started recording now.
Okay.
So I'm Josh, Sapienite, again, back for episode 2 with
Callie.
We're both at Studio Pandemonia. Our first episode we did on the Leo monsters, the 3 Leo monsters of our upcoming Nemesis deck, right? And today, in September, we're fittingly going to be doing an episode now on the 3 monsters of Virgo, right?
So the cardinal virtue of Virgo is prudence. And the biome that we're going to be taking a look at, where these monsters primarily live, is the forest. Normally, exercising prudence in the forest results in all kinds of good, bountiful things. You've got firewood for warmth, you've got medicines and different resources, food. So psychologically, the wound of prudence is uncertainty, because another word for prudence is like practicality, and it has to do with preparation. It has to do with anticipation of the unknown and trying to ward against it and the fear of it by just being as prepared as possible. So a lot of those Virgo kind of activities, it's a time of harvest, it's a time of getting ready for the winter and of processing things to be prepared for the unknown scarcity. It's not so much about the scarcity itself, it's about the unsureness. And so the wounding symbol, we talked about the thorn last time. So I think perhaps the symbol we've kind of centered on for this talk was the apple itself, or the fruit. Because a fruit, especially, for our hunter-gatherer forebears who didn't have the benefit of everything being kind of cherry-picked for them at the supermarket, all dolled up and pretty and coated in wax and everything. A fruit can be really dangerous because either you don't know if it's poisonous or not. In the case of berries, they're a huge danger, right?
You have to really know what you're looking at and what you're
right.
What you're doing.
So much prudence is required to even be able to make use of the plentiful opulence of the forest. So in the case of the apple, or maybe even the peach, if we wanted to make a labyrinth reference, is the concept of having a worm in it, or being rotten, or being corrupt in some way. That kind of symbol features prominently in mythology too. So I would say the fruit itself kind of carries with it this wounding of uncertainty, where it's like, is it safe? Can I eat this? Is it going to hurt me? Is it going to be gross? Am I going to be exposed to some nastiness in the form of like rotting or bugs in it or whatever? And so the golden apple also represents the uncertainty as far as knowledge of good and evil, and now being thrown into this space of free will, having to make decisions, and all of the burden that places upon a mortal being, as far as now having to exercise prudence and exercise that, and the self-consciousness and wariness now about worthiness and being correct, and what it means, what it might cost, and how people might judge you accordingly. Based on your reaction to uncertainty and weakness, it might reveal about your character. So we'll go with that symbol for the wound for now.
That's pretty good. That makes a lot of sense. Makes sense with Demeter and Persephone and everything as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, obviously the concept of the pomegranate being what binds you in that pact to the underworld, having consumed a fruit, changes you. You're altered forever. Having eaten of the fruit of the Garden of Good and Evil, you are irrevocably altered in the eyes of God, right? You are now a totally different being because of this free will. But of course, there's this duality where if you venture in and you're not prepared, you might come upon something like one of these monsters. So we're going to talk about first the excess of prudence, which is criticality.
And criticality would be, if you want to get do you have the painting ready?
I do.
Or, I almost forgot about that step. The Wendigo.
I didn't forget.
Or the Bear Walk. The not quite Jotun, But there are various terms in various mythologies for this wandering beast of the forest, this wild horned god, a supposed evil version, which is very critical of humankind, very critical of everyone who trespasses, and tends to be a cannibalistic type animal, eats people, eats anything.
Normally, of course, the horned god of the forest is a benevolent deity who represents the connection between mankind and their animalistic nature and helps to bring the two into balance, and has other associations with language and all of these other things and the ability to kind of transcend. But this dark form of the Wendigo doesn't talk, is like very reserved, inaccessible, can't really be beseeched in any way. And so what Josh means by Jotun is not the typical Nordic term. It's just from that movie, The Ritual, which features a Wendigo-like creature that they call a Jotun, but is basically in that movie just this old god who's been able to kind of hide out in the forest undetected and is building this kind of like zombie cult situation. And the theme of that movie psychologically is just like judgment, guilt, trying to seek absolution through submitting to this god. But it is a cruel god who just ends up impaling people on trees mostly. That's kind of his bag.
And then doesn't he like integrate them into himself too? A little bit? Or like he holds them up, or I don't know.
No, the ones he keeps are just kind of like zombified. They call them like thralls or whatever. No, mostly he just is killing on them pretty severely. But he is supposed to, in the movie, represent kind of an inner guilt or an inner criticality. So he's particularly appropriate as an example. Yeah.
Emptiness, almost. Like a negative force of ill will everywhere it goes. Which is kind of what it is. And I'll quickly mention the movie Pet Sematary, where supposedly it's a Wendigo that's causing these animals to be resurrected in this cemetery, because his ill will, his kind of the way that he reflects the humans' collective guilt of paving roads through the wilderness, right? Because there's these trucks that go by and they hit everyone's pets, and they have the cemetery for them. Essentially, everyone's like subconscious guilt when they're going through the area. They're just like, I gotta get out of here. They drive really fast. They end up, killing a lot of things, and those things come back to wreak vengeance upon even their own masters. And there's kind of that ethos of punishment,
Yeah, and just that feeling of uneasiness and discomfort and lack of fit kind of goes back to the whole Wendigo skinwalker kind of motif of just kind of the crawling of the skin kind of sensation, and that searching, wandering. There's kind of a bit of a temptation or trap, but we're going to get into that much more on the other motifs, but that will be kind of a common theme. So one other movie that's one of our favorite, being from Michigan, is Escanaba and the Moonlight, whereas there's the monster, the Bear Walk, who isn't really depicted in a monstrous way. It's kind of alluded to. But what the Bear Walk is really doing psychologically is making them feel very uncomfortable in this place that is their family cabin and home, that usually things are very predictable, they're very normal, and all of these anomalies keep happening to freak them out, make them behave erratically, and introduce all of these challenges that force them, the main character at least, to kind of do some introspection and some inner work about what his hangups really are and why he is unable to kind of face life and mature in some ways. So this challenge is issued in a more benevolent way in this movie than the others that we mentioned.
Well, the weird thing about Escanaba in the Moonlight is like, it's a comedy, but like it's so weird how almost cosmic horror or just absurd it gets at some points, where it's like, is this a comedy or is this horror? Because like that whole night that they spend with the Wendigo or the bear walk outside the house, and the talk about aliens and demons and all these things that are happening. They're working through some shadow work, I guess.
So, with criticality being the excess of prudence, the misuse of prudence then is escapism.
Sorry. So the creature, the monster, the motif that we went for this kind of escapist mentality of Prudence is the hollow. We ended up coming up with the term the hollow, actually, because it's this hole, this usually depicted as something of a hole inside of a tree or in a forest somewhere that you could fall into, and you could get trapped into it, you get lured into it, and it's a big mystery down there, or perhaps it's a whole new world like Alice in Wonderland, or it devours you like some of the not the Ents from Lord of the Rings, but I forget what's the name for the actual trees, but the living trees.
Yeah.
The living trees.
When they grab you and kind of crunch you.
Yeah, they grab you and bring you in and wrap you in. It's different from the Wendigo because it's kind of more of a force. It's just generally around, and it's kind of a big, almost collective of roots, and it's basically the mother, the mother of the forest, the tree mother in a way is this collective, unconscious thing that's dragging you down into its rule, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like the hollow earth thing. It's like the core itself and the idea. I mean, there's this kind of cosmic horror unknown that's space, right? And there's lots of feminine darkness themes that go with that as far as like the void or the unknown. But, as above, so below, there's also this kind of core of the earth, dark underworld. It's chthonic, but it's not like moist cave chthonic like some of our other themes will be. It's kind of just a very dry, cold, hard wood kind of chthonic of getting lost in that tree stump, or like the idea of being encased in a tree. I think is a very ancient fear motif as well. And the example that I wanted to bring up that's my favorite from this is actually Fern Gully, because it's depicted as a benevolent force in Fern Gully because the bad guy Hexus is banished into the hollow. It's sort of this containment place where evil can kind of be temporarily contained, and as long as nobody violates the sanctity of that containment, right, evil, it can never be fully destroyed. That's a very prevalent theme in so many fairy tales, is that you can never really get rid of evil, and even if you could, you wouldn't want to, because then what would be good? So the idea of just needing to contain evil, keep it in its place, and put it in a certain context is very prevalent in this hollow theme. And so in Fern Gully, of course, the logging company cuts the tree. The evil spirit of pollution and all of that is let out. And they have to regrow the tree with their fairy magic to try to encapsulate it again and keep it contained so it can't corrupt anything else. So that's kind of interesting on the escapism theme, because it's almost like evil and escapism are going hand in hand. It's like that's where pure evil has to dwell and has to go, because it is this potential and this concept and this idea and this unknown. And normally it wouldn't be brought into the world. It wouldn't have a place to have this incarnation if they were not easily influenced and corruptible vessels. So the hollow is kind of this natural force that is retaking that potential and keeping it from being out in the world. And so in the illustration, Josh was pretty adamant about this parallel also, in reference to Eden as kind of an escapist concept.
Yeah.
So
I was about to bring that up. Thanks for segueing so well. Yeah, the apple in there, the golden apple that we put in there. I know I chose the color to be gold in the design part stage of it. It's this tantalizing idea that, here's the paradise, here's Eden, or here's the sacred knowledge, the sacred life force, immortality. The apple, it represents many things. Like in general, in this sense, in the shadow sense, it represents the idea that you can get away from all of your problems. You can escape all of your problems, all your limitations of mortality, of the desert, of desolation, of managing your own resources, of, making your own arrows, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, so to speak. And you can just have all that given to you in this perfect garden, this, like a lot of these fantasies of a perfect other world, of into the West, these heavens and whatnot. Again, Lord of the Rings reference, some Valinor and such. The idea of heaven in general, Eden in general. Mm-hmm.
In Lord of the Rings, the trees are very prevalent symbols as kind of portals to other realms, or like conduits for other realms in general. And that kind of comes more from some of the European mythology, things like Yggdrasil and this world tree as being this portal, this transportational place you can go to and transcend to these immortal realms, or descend. They kind of serve as these byways for both, but there's always that caveat of the tree itself is alive. And you see that a lot in Greek mythology too, with the concept of the golden apples themselves, of the Hesperides, and of the peril that befalls you if you should try to achieve what you think you're going to get from this golden apple, this tantalizing prize. Is the danger of the tree being guarded by the dragon. We didn't feature artistically the dragon in this depiction because we didn't want it to be confused with some of our other draconic or reptilian motifs. But always, with like the Eden metaphor as well, like there's the implication of the serpent and this whole other side of temptation.
Yeah, and so like Eden in a way is a metaphor for the mother's womb, or the parents' how did I write it? Cradle. And when you're cradled in there, everything's safe, everything's provided for you. You don't have to learn the skills to provide for yourself. There's a dark aspect to that, though. Like, psychologically speaking, I know we talked about parenting for a second in the last one. I'd like to bring that up here too, as well, because I thought it's a fitting metaphor. It's like a parent that is like a hollow is the kind of parent that's overprotective, and that they don't really train you or teach you how to live out there. They try to bring you in and keep you here, basically in the cradle, in the womb, for all of your life. They don't want you to leave. They don't want you to figure your own stuff out, because being dependent on them, being provided for by them, is their purpose. That's their shadow then, and that shadow is coming out in the hollow inside of them that they're trying to fill with any and everything else. Everything needs to be part of their perfect garden, right? And there's a jealousiness to that too, which is kind of like God in the Bible in that way too. The jealousy that he has for people, follow my rules and stay in here, and don't think for yourself. Don't go outside of that box. And there's like such a harsh punishment for not following that.
Yeah, for free will in general, because that's the expulsion from Eden, is the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, and people can treat that like, oh, it's a bad thing that we have knowledge and that we have free will and stuff. Like, that's terrible. We could have had everything. But it's like this ideology that God is kind of manipulating Adam and Eve in that situation to feel that freedom is a problem, is bad. And the story is trying to tell people, oh, freedom's bad.
Right, because prudence is supposed to be discretion. It's supposed to be judgment.
Yeah, you learn how to judge. You don't just like follow the judgments of some rule, some parental figure, some principles. You have to actually decipher, decide, and discern right from wrong in the moment. And that's again why it's of knowledge of right and wrong, is the ability to actually decide for yourself. I mean, it's kind of Nietzschean, to reevaluate all values, right? It's like you leave the garden, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to like actually decide what is danger and what is safe, because it's not all given to me safely.
Well, besides just Nietzsche, it's the female selective mechanism itself, and it's that discrimination and that discernment that comes off as very punishing and cruel, and
Selection.
it's like this rejection,
Mm.
of essentially, the male and his right to be able to come and reproduce is kind of something like the fertility is something that all of these Virgo metaphors are really dealing with because she is the selector. And so that's why we associate Virgo in particular with kind of being judgmental, more so even than Libra, oddly enough. But it's the analysis, and the prudence comes from the analysis. It comes from the evidence and looking at the
Practical.
physical reality, because Virgo is an
Mhm.
earth sign. So it's not just ideological, it's very much dealing with the physical reality of what is being presented for judgment. And so
Mhm.
one
Mhm.
example that I find really interesting that I have no idea really about, because I don't play the Soulsborne kind of games. I don't play any of them, but I've been watching this video series about the characters and what they mean. And I was really inspired by the artwork. I do want to at least mention it, with the character who is in the Erd tree goes back to the womb to go through a rebirth. And I don't really know a whole lot about the mythos as far as like the chosen and all that, but um, that character ends up being ripped and transported from the womb tree, and that whole visual was very striking, and I tried to incorporate that a bit as I was thinking about this illustration. And it really gets back to what we were talking about as far as, if you try to do that, if you try to uh, go back into this hollow and
Mhm.
experience some kind of Eden or rebirth, you have to do so through making a pact. And in the game, of course, that pact, which is very gory and it's kind of a blood pact, is how it's presented in the game, is like very easy uh, to take, to steal, to misallocate. It's a very vulnerable moment of pregnancy where, you can kind of by cesarean, be removed forcibly. So, like, if you, as an adult, try to then give back uh, that free will and return and regress and go back into the hollow, you open yourself up for all of this demonic corruption, because someone can take advantage of your vulnerable state and try to take that kind of primal birthing power for themselves in whatever way. So that kind of gets back to the parenting thing that Josh mentioned.
Mm. And a final note, I guess, about the art inspiration as well that I kind of pushed for on top of the Apple one is Poltergeist. So
Mm,
like every millennial, I would imagine, one of the most horrifying scenes ever was with a tree in the front yard coming in and taking kids out of their beds and trying to take them into the hollow, basically. Like that shit was scary.
hmm
And so I felt like capturing that energy is cool. I mean, it's also the tree in the front of Hogwarts in Harry Potter. I wanted to mention
Yeah,
that too. That's
yeah.
definitely the motif as well.
So the last one is the lack of prudence, the absence of prudence, which is depravity.
Hmm.
You're really gonna love the name for this one. We really put our heads together.
Hmm.
Tell them, let them know.
We decide on flesh flower. We were considering corpse flower as well, but that would imply it's just normal corpse flower. Oh my gosh, that's horrifying.
I put a lot of love in this one. I
Yeah, you
really
put a
the
lot of
design.
motifs in that boy, that thing.
The more upset that Josh was, the more I knew I was on the right track.
Yeah, yeah, it was very, very disturbing. You got, I remember like all the mushroom motifs that you have in there. You added some mushroomy stuff. That makes sense because mushrooms are just so they're kind of gross, and they're also, I guess, to start off with the motif talk, they're very sexual. You know,
Mhm.
they're thematically very much that both genders. But this motif is indeed very basically on a fly trap, or they usually call it a man trap. Um, it's quite hard to find a good word for what we wanted to call it as a universal motif. But it's to draw a distinction from the Wendigo. Obviously, it's not like a Wendigo because Wendigo is this like masculine walking through the forest protecting critical energy. and the hollow is this stationary sort of world, viney, collective idea. But this motif of like a man trap is more like it's focused on one kind of seductive image, whether it's like a picture or sometimes it's like a woman that's portrayed, a beautiful woman, kind of like a siren, but in the woods. It's trying to lure people in. It's trying to focus people on this flower. So it's like a metaphor of a flowering plant. Usually, I think mushroom is all right. I think mushroom's probably a little more masculine, but this flower is a little bit more feminine. So both are kind of like this interesting motif.
Yeah. So in the art, I was really inspired by Anima from Final Fantasy, actually, one of the summons, aeons, what have you. The imagery of that, I've always been really fascinated by. And of course, she has a very Venus flytrap, kind of like Rangda facial features almost. And for me, like her bound and chained appearance and just overall theme really it stands out from all of the other ones. First of all, like it's definitely when you first see it. I haven't played after 10, so I'm referring to Final Fantasy 10 because I'm old. But when she first appears, you're just like, "Whoa, this escalated quickly." From all of the other cool monsters. They're just like, "Oh, that's kind of rad."
There's a
that's
lot
like
symbolically going on with
unicorn
that
situation. That's real cool. I like that. And then you get the Animon. It's like, oh,
she's got so many different motifs going on her though. Like, do you want to explain some of those?
Kind of a mummy and kind of, but what she represents that I've really thought too much about is just this kind of embodiment of female suffering and feeling bound and like how going through pregnancy and all of that, the incredible burden that is as far as like removing your mobility, kind of binding you to a fate, setting you on this course and like it not being necessarily of your choosing. And just her as the symbol of like what incredible pain and bleeding and suffering that whole reproductive process kind of encapsulates and like the inevitability of that and the especially just like how immobile she is. The chains really stuck with me as the the symbol. So I didn't put chains in this design. It was more through the roots and more through the vines and stuff, because she's not really able to move of her own volition. She's encumbered. And so she has to bring things to her. So that's where the whole temptation, flowering, seductive sort of lure comes in. There's a lot of different mythologies that have this kind of creepy plant motif, right? Because there's this whole area of horror that's like weird, is it a plant? Is it an animal? Like anything that kind of exists in that subliminal space. So that's why mushrooms also kind of go there. There are these things that we don't fully understand that are integral to nature. We know that they're important. We know that they're all part of the process, but from our human perspective, they're incredibly cruel and incredibly like arbitrary and punishing in kind of that critical way. But depravity is different because it's not judging you, right? It's just taking advantage of you. It's just preying upon lust, like not even in a like siren song kind of way, not even like trying to be super alluring as far as like really catering to human sexuality. It's just sexuality in general. So just this very like so animalistic. It's actually not even an animal anymore. It's a plant. It's very bizarre and disturbing to us. And so the imagery is particularly triggery, I guess. It brings in kind of that theme also of like vagina dentata. We talked a little bit about there's some
teeth?
of that in it. Yeah, teeth.
Do not put any kind of imagery for that one.
No. Well, it's the premise is there. We try
people
to
know what we mean. But like when you mentioned the mushrooms, like part of the reason that it's so different from the other motifs is because mushrooms are about decay. They feed off of waste and decay, and that's why they would feed off of people's kind of worst urges or whatever. They just collect what waste they can collect. They just They use what's left over. And they're an important niche in the environment. That's crazy about that, is it's so important to have. I think Taters wants to
Well,
come.
and then they use those nutrients and they reproduce so prolifically. I think there's kind of something in this about sort of that seeds or spores or spawning too, of just that kind of indiscriminate. I think that's where the depravity really comes in, is just this like
Indiscriminate.
the inevitability of the punishment of reproduction. It's not really shaming you for being sexual. It's not really like, oh, you shouldn't be so. It's like, no, this is just what this is. In
This is
order
what
to
it's
create
like.
new life, you have to consume old life. You have to, death and life are hand in hand. It's just how it works. And I think there's something so primal and terrifying about that motif, because on one hand, there's all these beautiful things about having children and reproduction and all that. But on a biological level, mechanically, how it works is just so, gross in some ways. It's got a lot of disgusting features to it that trigger
Yeah.
a disgust mechanism. And it's interesting for Virgo, who is kind of centered around that concept, that earthy concept of disgust and of discernment and judgment, to have this depravity, which is like just a complete absence, and leaning in and giving in fully to the inevitability of how gross biological life really is.
Come here, fool.
Someone's a problem.
Someone loud and annoying right now. Okay. It's the fear that manifests when someone is repressing sexual reality, right? So like it's so disgusting and repulsive, excessively so, because it is a real thing that is kind of gross, but it's real and must be understood. And to be afraid of it and to project it away and say, oh, girls, get that sexual stuff away from me, that creates this subconscious fear of this lingering, predatory sexual energy that's going to get you. And
you're not able to navigate it safely, and
you have to integrate that in order to actually not see it as a monster anymore, and to be able to function normally and not be afraid of it, right?
Well, you mentioned earlier, and I think it is kind of a good example of the kind of more insecty mantis kind of motif, as far as like the man-eater, as far as, praying mantises after they breed consume the male so that female can have more nutrients for producing eggs. And that's like, I think, tying in exactly to what you're saying about that deep-rooted male fear of being kind of taken advantage of in that way, where it's like you're just flesh, you're just a donor, and then you're discarded or you're eaten, because you have to not only give your genetic material, but you have to give your entire self.
Get involved, integrate the messiness, not only sexually, because humans are more complicated than like other animals. Like for the male, like we don't just get eaten after we have sex, right? Like we actually have to protect the family, stay with the family, rear the kids, take care of the kids, feed them, feed the cat and everything, like you have to stick with it. And that, a fear of the sexual reality, I think would also lead to a fear of that sort of commitment, that sort of long-term commitment to like all of the messiness and all the complications of dirtying yourself, in that situation.
Because fear and detachment from the feminine results in this never-ending cycle of wounding for the masculine, because that leads to this absent father who also isn't there for the sons, and so the sons continue this cycle, and there's just never a full engagement, and they never get like the full benefit of like having a healthy relationship with the father and with maleness in general. And so they are always kind of operating in this partial way, whereas the goal ultimately of this this masculine prudence, if we want to look specifically at that, as far as the because we talked a little bit about in the Leo one, you have this manticore as kind of the excessive, and is this dark lion, this scar. But then you have the winged lion, who is this ultimate symbol of sort of nobility and
loyalty,
kingship, like all of these really great things that are like the healed Leo. And so the healed masculine Virgo is very interesting too, as far as this woodsman or this, Cernunnos, this horned one, who is this virile, potent sexual male who is not just, running rampant Zardoz, he is in command of his sexuality. He isn't in denial of it. He is able to act upon it when it is appropriate, and therefore there is fertility, there is connection, and he is in this ultimate union. If you go by like Wiccan tradition, the horned god with the moon mother, the witchy mother, feminine Selene kind of energy is so beautiful, right? Because you have the wilderness and the moon and us between it in perfect harmony with all the other forms of life on Earth, including this weird plant stuff, right? And so in order for the male to embrace that healed masculine prudence and no longer be in fear of being unselected, right, of being unworthy, of being, not the one to pass on the genes, there has to be this ultimate respect, reverence, and integration of the selection mechanism, of the disgusting parts of reproduction, of involvement with the protection and the child rearing, which the Beastmaster is able to do. Because let's face it, a Beastmaster is good at fatherhood stuff. If you can wrangle the wild animals, that's kind of a metaphor for
that's all the imagery of Cernunnos, Karunta, Rudra, all of these deities across the globe of the horned god holding the snake and the stag and all these different creatures, or playing music for them, like Link or like Orpheus. I think there's that's the sacred masculine, which is an acceptance of the animal within them and the animals outside of them, and the protection of the ecosystem and the world that they live in, right?
So that's the healed masculine, and then the healed feminine kind of form of the tree and the hollow is this earth mother that is benevolent and opulent and provident, and maybe is able to be at peace with and accept the encumbrance of pregnancy and the vulnerability that creates, as far as you're not able to move, anything can come and attack you because you have the union of the woodsman with the tree, and they both feel safe and protected in each other's energy. Where the tree is no longer this hollow, tempting threat that's just trying to suck you in and take you over, and the woodsman is no longer, this axe wielding maniac who, cuts down the forest, lets all the evil spirits out, and everything's haunted and stuff now. Yeah. Yeah, the tree is giving willingly. We actually saw that in the latest episode. We've been watching Rings of Power, and it's growing up. I really like the next season. But there's this concept with the tree, not to spoiler too much, but there is a contrast between willingness of giving of natural resources and forceful, in the case of like Two Towers with the orcs and the cutting and the Ents and all that we referred to, the resentment that unconsensual taking of the forest resources creates for the Ents, versus like a conversational negotiation and like pact that you make with the forest to give freely of its opulence, resources, fruits, wood, etc., to create coziness and warmth for your human existence. And it's interesting the contrast between like orcs who just take, and hobbits who are in this communion with nature already. And getting to see hobbits in different environments has been super dope to me. I really love that. They have a dialogue, right? They have a relationship with the land and this intense sense of community with it. And they do all of these things to take it and take care of it and tend it and engage in permaculture. And it's rad. I really love the show so far. So thank you so much for joining us for this second episode. I hope you're finding them somewhat interesting, and we will continue on our merry way through the rest of them.
Next would be Libra, right? Probably do that soon enough. But yeah, see you then. Bye.